invite us to stand as we hear from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 5th chapter.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. People do not light a lamp and put it under the bushel basket. Rather, they put it on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light so shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Okay, let's work backwards from this just a little bit because I think it'll be more fun this way. So the last sentence is the one everybody hears it and they're like, "Oh man, I'm screwed." Except rewind that script, which how many of you thought that when you heard the last sentence? Like low key, yeah, right? Remember, the scribes and the Pharisees are not very high in Jesus' book. He's constantly calling them hypocrites and liars and a lot of other names, actually. Not much gentleness going the way of the scribes and the Pharisees from Jesus' mouth ever. And so, actually, if you read it that way, and if you've repeatedly read the Gospels and you've heard what Jesus has to actually say about the scribes and the Pharisees, and then you hear this sentence, maybe it sounds differently. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You're like, dude, that's a really low bar. I might actually, like, I might actually be able to make that one. I don't know for sure. But maybe mess with that a little bit in your brain so that you're not completely hung up as you're thinking about this text on the whole topic of like, I have to be perfect in order to go to heaven or something like that. At least for now, just kind of let that go and maybe think like, okay, we're all being asked to walk through a door and it's a normal sized door and I know how to walk through those doors. Jesus is in the middle of this sermon. It's called the Sermon on the Mount because he goes up on like some kind of hill and then everybody is like listening to him. And we're already now past some of the really famous parts like the Beatitudes and some other things that get quoted so frequently from Matthew 5. And then now he looks around at this group of people that's gathered around him and he has these lines that he says which have become really important for our way of thinking about who we are as the people of God. One of them is, you are the salt of the earth. And so sometimes communities are invited to think about what does it mean to be salt or salty. And there's a whole bunch of kind of analogical stuff that can go on there. And then the second one, you are the light of the world. And then this one is one of the ones that gets used very frequently in worship because it's what we say at baptism. So, if you were baptized here at this font or in some other place, it's very likely that somebody lit a candle for you, handed the candle to you, or to your parents if you were too small to take the candle, and said, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." So Jesus mentions these couple of things, and now this little group, these 12 disciples, plus the bonus content that was around them, and then this larger crowd that's gathered, is all hearing and overhearing that they are salt and they are light. And then it's put into this wider context of a sermon, which we struggle with, where Jesus is wrestling to kind of help us think about how that relates to the law. So the basic theological thing that's happening here is this. I'll try to kind of get this in our brains because I think it's probably worth us reflecting on. Because you might go back later today and read the Sermon on the Mount in total, and you'd be like, well, some of that was pretty nice, but then a lot of the rest of it was like really, really hard on me. Because there's a bunch in it that's really, really challenging from the law perspective. It's really, these are the passages that sometimes we don't even want to read in church about if your right hand offends you, cut it off. And there's like all this stuff in here that's very strict around kind of legal observance, and don't know what to do with that. So I'm going to start with this lens. Consider, and this is very Lutheran, but what I'm going to say to you next is the beating heart of the Reformation insight, like what Luther was up to when Luther made a shift and when he started becoming popular as a writer and everybody was reading Luther, because he's rereading the Psalms, he's rereading Romans, he's reading the Gospels, and he comes to this insight. Roman Catholicism, in which I'm situated, has kind of gotten this whole law-gospel tension wrong. And what is actually supposed to be happening in the law and the gospel, and the tension between it, is the law only has one function, essentially. Do you know what it is? Make you aware that you're a sinner. Kill you with your awareness of your own sin. That's like kind of the... Okay, again, I don't always talk this way, but I'm doing the Lutheran thing for you this morning just a little bit, right? So that's what the law does. The law is supposed to kind of convict you of your sin, make you feel like you're very aware of your sin and that you can't do anything about it. And then the other part of the law-gospel dialectic is the gospel. And what's the gospel supposed to do? Okay, that's a popular answer, but not yet the Lutheran reformational answer that Luther breaks through with. Does anybody else want to try and then feel bad when I tell you that you were not quite right? And that is also the popular answer to this question. It is not quite the Lutheran reformational insight that Luther has. Anybody else want to do it too? This gets really fun. If I can make like 2 or 3 people feel like they almost got the answer right. I'm just kidding. But okay, this is why this is complex. The gospel, in the very early, like where Luther like breaks through, is the gospel is, now that you realize you're a sinner and you're dead because of the law, you ask for God to do it. What you can't do. So the gospel is, you could say that it's faith, and you can say that this is good news, but what's really happening is the gospel is turning you into a supplicant. It's helping you to realize you can't do it, and instead to ask the one who can do it to do it. This is why some popular, Southern and kind of talk back and forth theology within, if maybe you've heard this in some churches, when somebody will be preaching, and if we were actually in a talk back church, they might say, "And won't God do it?" You ever heard people say that? Won't God do it? Like, this is where this starts to make a lot of sense. So the gospel is that you can ask God to do it. Okay. This last week I went down to visit Texas Lutheran University because one of the students at the Lutheran campus ministry at Texas Lutheran has been following my Substack blog for a long time and decided that they really wanted to have me come down and do a visit on campus. But Texas Lutheran is kind of out there and remote. It's in Seguin, Texas, which is in a part of Texas where actually a lot of Lutherans did settle historically, especially German Lutheran ones. And they are a Lutheran institution in a state that is really mostly not Lutheran. 5% of the students who come to Texas Lutheran University identify as Lutheran. 5%. And the other 95%, at least as far as I understand it from like talking to the students that are in the campus ministry, there's a pretty big Cru movement, if you're familiar with Campus Crusades, which is now called Cru. There's a good number of Roman Catholics on campus. One of the things that all of the kids told me in the campus ministry is everybody that's here, it was their second choice or third choice. Like that's how they ended up at Texas Lutheran. And there's good things about the school, but that's the situation. It's a very regional school. So I got there to spend time with these students, and I realized they feel like an extreme religious minority on their own campus that's called Texas Lutheran University. Spoke at the chapel, and there was maybe they have chapel services at 10 a.m. 3 days a week during the school year, and there's like 30 or 40 folks in there for the chapel, and some of them are Lutheran, but not that many. They're also just kids who want to come to chapel and faculty. So I spent time with them. And every event that I went to, there was like anywhere from, 8 to 12 kids showed up. We had one event where they brought together the campus ministry together with SAFE, which is Texas Lutheran's version of a GSA. So we had a gathering of the campus ministry and the GSA together and talked about what they are thinking about in terms of what they want to do with students on campus. And Texas Lutheran is really struggling, like a lot of liberal arts colleges who are trying to figure out these things. And the University of Arkansas is definitely in the mix here in an entirely different way. But like the whole thing of like residential college versus commuter students and the whole post-pandemic phenomenon of campus life having been impacted dramatically by not having been able to have campus life for 2 or 3 years and then trying to figure out how to bring all of that back. What I experienced spending time with them is there was a lot of energy. Like everything I did, like a bunch of kids showed up. They had a lot of passion for what they were doing. So I kept hearing this script from them that they were small and that they were a minority and that they were struggling in a space where they kind of thought, well, if we're struggling on a Lutheran campus as a Lutheran campus ministry, then what does that mean? But what I saw was something different as an outsider coming in. I saw real passion and vitality and interest, and like they successfully figured out as a campus group how to bring some random pastor from Arkansas that they were interested in meeting with down to talk with them. And I kept thinking about this salt. As I drove back, I kept thinking about the University of Arkansas and the struggle that I've had in my mind over the years about how to do any kind of like Lutheran thing at the University of Arkansas, which I've never figured out a great path forward on that. But it was actually, I was really relieved. I was like, well, if Texas Lutheran University only has 5% Lutherans on campus and is trying to figure out how to do campus ministry, what possible luck could I have, or we have, doing that on the University of Arkansas campus, where there's, except for if I start to count, around the room right now, there's university here. So a lot of this is our mentality. A lot of our sense of like what counts as being vital and strong and worth doing is about whether you think you're supposed to be if you're making a casserole, do you think that you're supposed to be the meat or the pasta? Or are you supposed to be the cream of mushroom soup or the pepper or the salt? Last week, we had a gathering of the newer families here for a lunch. And one of the couples that stood up, the one partner in the couple said that they grew up in a Lutheran church. So when they moved to Arkansas, they knew they wanted to be a part of a Lutheran church. And they said, and we were 10 people in worship on a good Sunday and 15 for Easter. And that gives you a very different perspective than if you are a member of Cru or Cross Church at the University of Arkansas and you look at scale and all these kinds of things. So what Jesus is doing here in the Beatitudes, last week I mentioned this whole thing about, is it your job to win? Or is it something different than that? But the other thing Jesus is doing here now is he's equipping a community of people that's a very small community who he knows is going to be encountering tremendous opposition. Or it's possible that the gospel writer of the Gospel of Matthew, writing this when Christianity is actually and actively meeting opposition and the temple is being torn down, so Judaism is becoming hard to practice in the region where they live, in addition to any emerging form of Christian faith. The author of Matthew is giving the community that's reading this the same kind of tools and has Jesus say, you're salt. You are a light on a hill. And it is an incredibly powerful and faithful move to recognize that situation. Try to shift your perspective. So instead of saying, well, we're so small, make the Adrienne Marie Brown move. Any of you ever read Emergent Strategy or know those koans that she has in that book? They're really great. And one of the parts of her emergent strategy is small is all. Small is all. But the gospel move, the gospel insight is, and this is especially powerful when you're small, it's especially powerful when you feel oppressed, it's especially powerful when you feel like you can't figure out what the move is or what you're supposed to do, or if everything feels impossible. Won't God do it? The move is not, as the salt, to think to yourself, well, if I could just figure out how to be the meat, or the pasta, or the cream of mushroom soup, and good luck trying to figure out how to be the cream of mushroom soup, because nobody knows what's in that. But you use it everywhere. I grew up on it. We ran out of some things in our house, but never cans of cream of mushroom soup because it was in every casserole. If you're the salt, you are not going to be able to make the whole dish. You are going to have to ask God to do it. The gospel is we need God. And God will. That's the gospel. What will God do? Then your answers make sense. Good news, establish freedom in Christ Jesus apart from the works of the law. But those are all things that God does, according to that insight of the Reformation. The actual insight was Luther was chastising himself over and over again and burdening himself with the sense that he was supposed to do it and couldn't. And then one day, it was probably not one day, but he says it was one day. He read it again and realized it was about the righteousness of God and not his own righteousness. So you go back to this thing again. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Could you be personally perfectly righteous? Unlikely, although I've met some of you, and some of you are rather close. But who can do it? So I'm aware that this is not the discourse that the dominant form of Christianity is having in the United States right now. The prayer breakfast last week was about how it's wild how much heresy is out there right now. You know, Pete Hegseth saying that soldiers will be saved if they die for a Christian nation.
That's what Islam says. Well, that's what some branches of Islam
Some militant forms of Islam sometimes say, just to be careful. And apparently some militant forms of Christianity now say. And also, there's a forced one-sidedness. So the wildest one is this last week at that same prayer breakfast, Trump said that he had made it so that churches can freely advocate for political candidates, and that he ended the Johnson Amendment. This is low-key actually true. It was already true before, but he's made it extra true now, so that's actually the fact. I could stand up here and probably not get in any trouble. This church would not get in any trouble if I just stood here and told you how to vote on a Sunday. And so that has changed. But then he added, but if you don't tell them to vote for Trump, then I'm going to come after you and pull your tax-exempt status. That's the heresy of there's only one political party and it's mine. And so these are the kinds of things we're living in, and you can just every single day, it's actually a really probably smart idea in terms of being informed and a bad idea emotionally, just wake up and read Heather Cox Richardson and be like, well, God, what am I going to do about this today? And that's where this becomes so incredibly important and powerful. It's not your job to do it. It's God's. Now, it is also true that you really ought to do everything that you can do. So like if I were sitting in a room with a group of people who could remove certain people from power and shift the political spectrum in certain specific ways, and they said, we're not going to work on that, we're going to let God take care of it, I would be like, you better buckle up. You know, like, I mean, but so many people are in the position that they can't do it, and they feel disempowered from doing anything. And then that becomes so incredibly oppressive but God can. And there are constantly, daily, weekly, and monthly, and yearly stories of surprises where when people trust that God will, God does. And the wildest ones are when you think you've gotten to an entirely impossible position, and then there's something new. Our job, the one that Jesus gives in the gospel, is you are salt. You are light. Remain tasty. And if your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, those assholes. Right? Amen.